Oh, I am here with a long form video, finally. And my guinea pigs are in the background running around like the crazy little rodents they are. So, it is almost the end of March, which means if you're participating in Historathon, you know that quarter two. Discord message, I'm going to ignore you for a second, sir. Um, that quarter two is coming up, which means we are going to read nonfiction books nonfiction books about 500 AD to 1500, otherwise known as the Middle Ages. My favorite time period to talk about, to study, to research, and recently to write about, because I am writing a historical fiction novel set in the early Middle Ages, which is about 542. In my mind, that's kind of where the Middle Ages starts, because that's when the Plague of Justinian began. And I'll insert an image right here of another book I'm going to read. It's online. It's an ebook. It's called Justinian's Flea, about the Plague of Justinian and the first outbreak of bubonic plague. And if there was one constant throughout the Middle Ages, it was definitely bubonic plague. I think when you say the word, at least to Americans, Middle Ages, I think probably the first thing that'll pop into somebody's head is knights in shining armor and Black Death. So there we go. So let's get started with the book. Some of these I'm going to read / try to read. Some of these I've already read, and my phone's going off too. Some of these I've already read and they're just recommendations. But first, according to my friend, this is like the quintessential Middle Ages book. It is A Distant Mirror, the calamitous 14th century. This is by the woman who also wrote Guns of August, which I think won a Pulitzer Prize about like the month before like the start of World War I. But evidently this is the best medieval book ever written. You can see I got a sticky note in there. I kind of started it, kind of didn't start it. I read it once when I was in the bathtub. So Distant Mirror, the calamitous 14th century. I'm going to try to keep this video short and just show you all the books, not necessarily talk about them all. Yeah, so The White Ship. This is actually by Princess Diana's brother. But The White Ship, if you know me, you know I love Ken Follett, is actually the ship that sank and started the whole war that is in Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It's called The Anarchy. Normally when I talk about the Anarchy, people think I'm talking about the Wars of the Roses, because it's a civil war, a succession crisis, but it was about 300 years earlier, and there is some evidence that it was more bloody, and it all started with the sinking of the White Ship. Next, you can't see because the half-price book sticker's in the way, but this is the year 1000, what life was like at the turn of the millennium, and this one goes month by month through the year 1000. I think specifically in England. My novel is going to take place in the 11th century, first half of the 11th century in Normandy. So if this is just about England, it might not be as helpful as I think, but we'll see. And then another one that has a half-price sticker covering it is the Saxon and Norman Kings. Very vintage book. Will I read this? I don't know, but I do kind of like just looking at it. And I wonder who that is on the cover. Kind of looks like King Stephen. I'll have to look it up. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. And then after the Normans came the Plantagenets. So Dan Jones is a huge historian. He's written stuff on the Knights Templar. He recently came out with like a book called Power and Thrones, which I think is up there on my desk or on my bookshelf somewhere. I didn't think to bring it down. But this is the Plantagenets, the warrior kings and queens who made England. And the Plantagenets are actually descended from the Normans because it was Henry II's daughter by whom the Plantagenets began, her son, Henry II of England. So Matilda was a Norman, Henry II was a Plantagenet from marriage, blah, blah, blah. All right, this one I have read. I love it. The Very Secret Sex Lives of Medieval Women. This was interesting. This was weird. Yeah, exactly what it says. So we'll leave it there. Okay, another one of a lot of people's favorite subject, The Princes in the Tower. Now, this is by Philippa Langley, who's probably the #1 proponent of Richard III, that he was not an evil hunchback, that he loved his nephews. So we'll see what she has to say about the princes in the tower. I really want to read this. And then this is The Bright Ages. It's just a new history of medieval Europe. So I'll take a look at that one. Specifically, like, I know you know the term the Dark Ages. I think that specifically refers to the early medieval period, which is like Plague of Justinian to 1066. Speaking of 1066, here is a book on the Normans. These are the 4 Norman kings. And I've read part of this, haven't read all of it. Like, wow, this is a heavy paperback. But yeah, little vintage book about the Normans. And then this one I have actually read. I read it last year. It has some great art in it. The Normans, warrior knights, and their kingdoms. It definitely reads more like a textbook. It's not very exciting, but the images in here are just stunning. So moving on from that, we'll go with more Normans. How about that? Empires of the Normans. Conquerors of Europe. So I'll read this one too. You know, anything with Norman in it, I gotta read. And then Marriage and the Family in the Middle Ages. This is by the Geese couple, who wrote Life in a Medieval Castle, Life in a Medieval Village, like, you know, those books. So this one will probably be really helpful too for my novel. All right. Norman Heritage, 1066 to 1200. So that was the early, ooh, look at this. These sketches are awesome. So 1200 was like the time of King John, who was a Plantagenet. I think Richard the Lionheart had just died. So I'll give this one a look-see. I don't think it'll take me that long to read it. It's pretty short, and the font's like, the margins are huge. So yeah. Now, the war everyone thinks I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Anarchy, the War of the Roses. And gosh, at Half Price Books, look, it's one of those stickers, guys. I can't get it off. And how just tragic, because look at that cover art. So I'm going to read this. I honestly don't know if there's much more I can learn about the Wars of the Roses. It was bloody. It was disgusting. It was really, really sad. But yeah, look at the fashion back then. It's just so ugly. Okay, this is probably my this is my favorite book I've ever read over the Middle Ages, favorite nonfiction, and it might be a favorite book of all time. Lost Heirs of. So if you don't read any books in Q2 about the Middle Ages, read this one. This talks about the kings and queens who never were. So we've got Robert Curthose, the Black Prince, heirs to the throne who died, were murdered, just skipped over, and never became king, but should have. Speaking of lost heirs, I've got the Black Prince. And I also have, I guess, kind of a companion novel, The Red Prince, about Edward the Black Prince's brother, John of Gaunt. I have that digitally. I will read it. So, England's greatest medieval warrior. He was Henry III's oldest son. Not much more to say. I guess this is a biography. I bought it used. It's an old library book. I took the paper off of it. But this one I didn't. This is the 100 Years' War. Another vintage book. Just obviously about the 100 Years' War from a place called Edward Little High School. This one I may try to take the plastic off because it's really nasty. But I don't know. I'm talking for a while. I'm starting not to feel well. And that's good because the last book I have here, I don't know if I'm going to read this one. It's an old vintage book, The Age of Plantagenet and Valois. So you can tell it's old. None of the colors, none of the pictures are in color. I think, wow, it's got a picture on every page. How cool is that? So maybe I will read this one since it's not as cumbersome as I initially thought. And it's probably got some interesting information being so vintage. So those are books to check out of Historathon. I'm getting messaged out the wazoo right now on Discord, so I gotta go reply to my friends. And I'm gonna take a rest. I am still getting over bronchitis. So See you guys. Please like and subscribe.